Hello, we're on. I was waiting for the record to come on. We're using Skype, and they're
What,
going to cut off Skype soon, aren't they?
next month?
Yeah, I'm Will Richardson here, and it's Nicholas Richardson there.
There.
Yeah, I got to do that with my hand. That's our sort of phrase that we start the show with, because you need a catchphrase, apparently. You don't actually, but Bill O'Reilly does the no spin zone. I don't know why he's spinning his finger if it's a no spin, but never mind. Um, we're not going to do anything like that because we're just not that smart. At least I'm not, but you are, and that's why we regularly talk to you to find out what keeps the world turning. I guess my first question to you should be, or is, whether it should be or not. Let the people determine if it should be by a majority vote. Um, yeah, the thing is tariffs. What the heck is going on?
Well, what's going on is I think the main thing that is clear is that those who have imposed this thing don't really know what they're doing. They don't understand tariffs. They don't understand international trade. And the equation which they have published to the world showing out how they worked out these so-called tariffs is absolutely hilarious because it has a couple of variables that simply don't vary. Which is 4 times 0.25 in every equation, which of course equals 1, so it makes no difference to the equation. But that aside, Trump talks about reciprocity, but the tariffs are not reciprocal. For example, typically, to the extent they exist, tariffs between the UK and the United States are somewhere in the region of 2 or 3%. And yet the tariffs imposed on the UK exports to the United States are 10%. Unless it's motor vehicles, in which case it's 25%. Similarly, with the European Union, the tariffs are typically under 10%, yet they have been hit with 20%. And then some really tiny non-existent places like Lesotho have been hit with sort of in the 80%, Vietnam and other places. And I think there are two really important points to make. One, the reason a lot of this manufacturing is done outside the United States is nothing to do with foreign countries ganging up on the United States, but is due to the decision of large American corporations to relocate their manufacturing capacity in a cheaper region. For example, Apple have said that if they built their Apple iPhones, which people use as a sort of worldwide popular piece of manufactured equipment, if they built them in the United States, they would cost $3,000 an item instead of the $1,000 or whatever they do cost. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is that industrial labor rates in the United States average about $55 an hour. In Canada, they're about half that, and if you go further east, they're a lot less than that. So it's not really the fault of many of these countries that things they make are made where they are because American business decided otherwise. Two, the second point is that I think the United States, in many ways, the United States is sort of rather charmingly stuck in the 18th century, which is actually one of its quite nice features. But in terms of economics, this mercantilist approach, which seems to say that world trade is a zero-sum game. So unless we, the United States, are getting more than our fair share of it, we are losing, is complete nonsense. You would expect to have surpluses with some countries and deficits with others, depending on what they're supplying with you. I mean, typically countries have deficits with countries which supply raw materials, for example, which they can't make at home or can't drill at home. So that's the point. And the mathematical formula was strange. Essentially, it takes the deficit with the United States, divides that by the volume of the exports from that country, and that creates a fraction, and then half that, which is then expressed as a percentage, which is then divided by 2, and that allegedly is the tariff. But I mean, it just makes, in many cases, even if you agree with tariffs, and most economists take the view that free trade is responsible for more prosperity than tariffs are, even if you agree that in certain cases tariffs may be justified, this is certainly not the way to go about it. And the actual net result of all of this is that the American consumer is going to pay for this in higher prices, And that will, of course, feed through into inflation, which will make the American consumer feel worse off. As I say, there may be an argument in certain cases for tariffs on certain product lines against certain countries, but this blanket "let's pick a fight with the world" is just ridiculous. Some people have described it here, in the United Kingdom at least, as Donald Trump's Liz Truss moment. Which is probably not a moment anybody really wants to have. And for those who may not be familiar, that Liz Truss was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom for 46 days, issued a budget which just created complete chaos, which resulted in her not being Prime Minister for very much after that. And now Trump, of course, doesn't face the same electoral sword of Damocles at this particular moment, so he probably doesn't care as much. So yes, tariffs may work.
Sorry.
In limited circumstances, but generally what's been done is a complete disaster for the United States economy, for the rest of the world's economy, as is seen. Don't take my word for it. Take the words of those clever people who who operate in the various stock markets and other markets around the world. And the bond yields are going up, so it's going to cost America more to essentially, in its simplest, more to borrow money. The Chinese have begun selling off treasury bonds, and nobody's quite sure, because it's not really happened before, what, if they keep it up, what volume, what the effect of a sustained sale of US treasuries will result in. So it's a bit chaotic, where chaos is not particularly welcome. Sorry for being so long-winded, but I think that's
No, I think that's a really good explanation. But may I add, there are advantages to the United States position that are being discounted. There are all kinds of other economic and strategic advantages to being the United States and the system that exists. That's one. And those would be having the currency of exchange in the world, the primary currency of exchange. It's a big advantage.
Too, yes.
Being in control of the trade routes, managing trade really on the high seas for the rest of the world. That's another one. Three, because of having American business interests, being able to locate on friendly terms all over the world, and also being able to have military bases and strategic positioning throughout the world. All of these are tied to America's position, and America, not to mention the advantages of American business getting cheaper labor abroad. So there are a lot of things tied into this that if you're an isolationist, you don't give a damn about, that have made America strong and kept the world secure since World War II. Now, if you alienate all your friends, it's going to, what if they start charging money for those military bases to be located, or just say we don't need you anymore, right? What if the vacuum, into that vacuum steps the enemies of the United States?
Well, exactly.
Right. Well, some people will say that those enemies are becoming, I was going to say toothless, that's a cliche, that the enemies are, power is reducing because China's and Russia's demographic problems, not to mention economic problems, and that the tariffs will really put China under the gun. But if they're selling bonds, if the Chinese are selling their bonds, that's going to affect things in a very negative way, at least in the short term. I mean, okay, life goes on. We got through the Depression. If you want to have another Depression, yeah, we'll get through that too. But the only reason we got through the Depression was because there were a lot of social programs created. It wasn't because of, and tariffs were one of the main reasons we had an extended Depression, right?
Exactly.
So,
well, yeah, the tariffs came in after the Depression, but they made the Depression worse.
Yeah, immediately after Hoover tried to rescue the country by putting on tariffs, thinking he's going to raise money in the 18th century way. But the 18th century America didn't have the currency didn't control the main currency of exchange and business throughout the world. It
Well,
was a different
exactly.
thing and a much smaller economy. I mean, a tiny economy compared to the empires that were extant, existing. Okay, so tariffs. I think we have no idea what's going to happen. I've listened to a lot of people talking about it on all sides, and no one puts forward a persuasive case either way. So I tend a completely persuasive case because no one knows, but I tend to align with the status quo and modifying it by increments, not turning it on its head. What do you say about that?
Well, I agree. They should have had a gradualist approach, and they should have looked at country by country, those countries for which they feel there's the biggest problem. China's one, because of the way the Chinese are able to manipulate their exchange rate. They've already devalued their currency partly to take into account of tariffs. The last I heard when I listened to the news today on the BBC was that China has now imposed an 84% tariff on all American goods. And the danger for the
Well,
United
we weren't exporting anything to China anyway. We're just making things, and we're exporting out of China and making things there. We're not. They don't buy any of our stuff anyway.
I don't know. I don't know what they may buy some of they certainly buy some of your stuff.
Well, they buy it. It's a small percentage. I
mean, the other interesting point is
I can't recall what it is, but it's not
in terms of GDP. Trade only accounts for 20% of the United States GDP, for example, whereas in the United.
Could you say that again, please?
Trade. I mean, the actual buying and selling trade only accounts for 20% of US GDP. In the United Kingdom, trade accounts for 60% of our GDP.
Which is amazing.
So we have a different.
How do you account for the difference?
Well, I suppose a lot more of your economy is sort of self-sufficient.
Produced on site.
It's produced in America and sold to Americans. In a nutshell, I mean, America's a big country, a long way from anywhere else, which does have the resources to be largely, if it chooses, self-sufficient.
Why are we fighting with Canada and Mexico rather than strengthening our ties? I mean, both of those countries, we get energy from Canada, a particular type of crude, which is sent to the United States, which is then manufactured in a special way. That doesn't really translate to the rest of the world. But that's one of the main products from Alberta, I believe it is, this area. The other thing is Mexico certainly has low enough wages, even if Canada doesn't, that it makes, and it's close, transportation costs are far, far less, that it makes sense for things to be done in Mexico, also to elevate their standard of living, because they're our neighbor, to stop the people having to come to America to make money and escape the terrible violence, which you never know is going to make you a victim.
Well, exactly. I mean, but
that stabilize Mexico.
Yeah, but that gets to the original point. You know, it wasn't the Mexicans who said, "Oh, we're going to build lots of factories to destroy the American economy." It was the American big business said, "Way, we can get rid of our union problems in, I don't know, Detroit, and build some of our vehicles in Mexico, where we pay people at a fraction of the price, have none of the union problems." And now Trump is trying to punish other countries for really decisions made, if we look at it logically, by American management.
Ultimately. Yeah, I mean, this is the point. I mean, and to his credit, though, he has encouraged a lot of investment that to be done in the United States. But the thing is, for example, if Apple comes here, they're not going to be able to afford people. They're going to have to use machines to make things.
The other point which people seem to forget is, if you ask people, and they're always surprised by the answer, which is the largest recipient of foreign direct investment? The country which is the largest recipient of foreign direct investment is, believe it or not, the United States. You can check the statistics, and this has been the case for a long time. So it's not that everybody else is ripping off the United States. The United States consumers choose to buy, consume things from that are made in other countries. This whole thing about motor vehicles is again a bit of a strange one.
That's a great place to start. Please analyze that.
Because American motor vehicles of the sort that most Americans drive, made by American companies, are the wrong size for European roads, for example. We have lots of very narrow streets which our little cars can shoot up and down, but a big American truck of the sort which people like to drive in America cannot fit in them. And also, it's not the case that we don't buy American vehicles. Ford, General Motors, they have European subsidiaries or subsidiaries in other parts of the world which make vehicles suitable for those markets. The Fords you drive in the United Kingdom or Poland, for example, are very different from the Fords you drive in America. Because
I think we made that point last time that Americans are, no, it wasn't with you, it was someone else I was talking to. That's a great point. America does make cars abroad, but they are licensed and they're different types of vehicles than the American cars. Because I keep hearing Americans, even smart people who've traveled a bit, saying, I heard Geraldo Rivera and Bill O'Reilly talking about this. They're both, often quite divergent points of view. Neither one is neither one is extreme. But Geraldo leans left and O'Reilly leans right. So, but Geraldo was saying, I just came back from Japan on holiday, and I didn't see any American cars on the streets of Tokyo. And O'Reilly said, when you travel to Europe, you don't see American cars, but there are cars made by Americans.
You see lots of cars made by American motor manufacturers.
Fords are all over. It's one of the most popular cars in England.
Just because General Motors in Europe uses the Opel brand, so they're under different names.
And Vauxhall is the brand they use in the UK.
Yes. So it's not that you don't see them. It's just that they are a different shape.
The French and the Spanish don't make. Well, maybe the Spanish do now, but the French don't make American cars. You can't buy a Ford in France. You got to go to Germany. Makes tons of these cars.
Yeah. So, that's another point to take into account, that anything you buy today is made of components which could have been made anywhere. I mean, all over the place. People assemble components. And by posing this huge, for example, this huge tariff on Taiwan, Taiwan has become a center for the supply of silicon chips.
Taiwan is an ally as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Why are they giving them a hard time?
And of course, you can build silicon chip factories in America. And everybody thinks we perhaps in the United States and the United Kingdom have gone too far in offshoring some of our production. But if you want to bring production home, as you might put it, or as Trump would put it, you've got to do it gradually, because these supply chains have built up over a long time. It's just not feasible one day to wake up and say, we're now going to move all our factories to Idaho or somewhere. And that's not how the world works, unfortunately.
That's why you have to do these things. I mean, even common sense tells you do it by increments. The main thing is to cut out the waste to get down there's two things suggested. One, cutting the waste in the government, which is huge. It's vast. Everyone knows, and the fraud, et cetera, et cetera. It's huge. That's one thing. The second thing is they're saying, the Trump administration is saying, we will tariffs will raise money. Okay, the old mercantilist point of view that you brought up, which was also Andrew Neil's point that he made. The great Andrew Neil, very sensible guy, very good writer.
Very sensible, yeah.
He's brilliant. He's been around so long. He must be 90.
He's not 90. I don't think.
Hope not, because he's one of my favorites to listen to. Anyway, he was saying it's the old mercantilist approach, and his brilliant Scottish accent. And it's exactly the point you made. that things of the 18th century, while some of the ideals of the Enlightenment are great, some of the economic policies don't translate. The core of Adam Smith translates.
Well, exactly.
But the core principles must be adapted to a totally modern world of industry that did not exist.
And it's all right, Trump saying we're going to bring industry back to the United States. Well, that's fine, but don't forget, a lot of things which are made in the United States, which we all buy, people can buy from other countries if they have to. I mean, there's a big debate, as you will know now, within NATO, with the whole, because of course this spills over into the whole NATO debate as to whether people should be buying F-35s or whether they should be buying European-made aircraft. And this is, and the same debate, if it's not already been had. I mean, there is both at Airbus and Boeing, there is a production bottleneck. I mean, they just can't produce planes quickly enough. But now airlines might think, well, hang on, if we're, do we want to buy Boeing or should we actually look at these Airbuses, for example? I mean, it's as simple as that. And so it's all right, Trump having all these factories back in the United States. But the question is he eroding his existing customer base? Do folk want to buy Abrams tanks, or will they buy something that's slightly cheaper from South Korea? There's all sorts of issues which people did not think twice about equipping themselves, particularly Poland, for example, with United States military equipment. Now they might think, well, how reliable it is. I don't think it's necessarily true, but there's this scare story going on that if you buy an F-35, America can turn it off. They've got a switch to kill your F-35. But that's probably not true. But the serious point is to what extent, these planes are so reliant now on computers that to what extent software updating and servicing is threatened if Trump wakes up one morning and decides that these Swedes are terrible people, or these whoever has suddenly in the middle of the night he's had a vision, and now the Swedes and the Germans and everybody else are just terrible people. So we've got to switch off those F-35s to protect America. Whatever vision he comes up with. So people are now having these debates. And they are one. Now there's another thing going the rounds that the United States is going to remove 10,000 troops from Romania and Poland. The Pentagon which is for people are all wondering. They say it's not just about tariffs, it's about the whole position of America within the Western world, which is now being called into question.
I think so many of these people don't even know. So many of these people in the Trump administration have very little idea of.
Well, you make a good point, because I was reading in the Times that, of course, at similar moments of world crisis, albeit this is one the Americans have actually largely caused themselves, people like George Bush was clever enough to delegate the decision making to people who were cleverer than them. Trump doesn't seem willing to delegate any decision making to anybody. And unfortunately for the United States, it seems that some of the people he surrounded himself with are not the most, are not the brightest people. I mean, you may not, for example, like people like Dick Cheney, but I mean, at the end of the day, nobody said Dick Cheney wasn't clever. Or the other guys or Rumsfeld, or these other guys, they knew their stuff.
Those two specifically were in Nixon's administration, so they were in government or around government in Washington for 40 years.
But my point is that they were actually, George Bush did surround himself with with clever people. And, like all revolutions, they begin to consume their children already now, wearing not his Doge hat, but wearing his motor manufacturer's hat. Elon Musk has suddenly realized that Tesla's position in the world is made much more difficult now as a result of tariffs, because his cars made in he makes some in China, he makes some in the United States, but like all motor manufacturers, his supply chain goes all over the place. He assembles bits from here, bits from, as does every car. And all of a sudden he realizes this is not a good result for him.
Well, has Musk really come out in favor of all the tariffs?
No, he's come out against the tariffs.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I think.
Now a spat with the.
I was hearing.
Yeah.
So that is another reason he is one of the people in the administration who is not towing the Trump line the whole way. And it looks like if you're not towing the Trump line, then you are going to find yourself on the outside looking in. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, that really is a sign of on the part of Trump of either being very thin-skinned or slightly immature or both. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher, when she was achieving great things for the country, always had in her cabinet people who disagreed with her. And you know, people who actually were clever said it didn't matter if you disagreed with Mrs. Thatcher. She was always prepared to listen to an argument in disagreement if it was well presented and you could marshal your facts. You know, she wasn't some sort of tyrant, but she was bright enough to realize that, you know, nobody has a monopoly on wisdom. Donald Trump, it seems, thinks he does see himself as some sort of messiah. And I suspect I've never met him, so I shouldn't really comment in that sense. But it does seem to me that
I know I haven't either. I know lots of people who have, and they say he's very charming generally, and funny, and even self-deprecating. And if you've seen him on TV interviews, he often before he became president, he was often like that. I mean, let's not get into a psychological profile of him. We're not psychologists.
No, we're not.
I mean, one can make broad observations, but I think the operative fact is we've never met him. We don't know him.
No.
He has, you know, in politics, we know perfectly good people on both sides who get pilloried. But I say both sides because in the United States there are two sides. In Britain there are three sides, or four. But and in Europe that's all. There are more parties. They're not three or four sides. Well, there could be three or four sides, couldn't there? It could be a rectangle. But or quadrilateral, I prefer to call it.
Quadrilateral, yes.
Instead of a rectangle.
Yes.
I think you can understand why.
Of course.
Yeah. So because the sides are not all equal lengths. So when you have those parties in Europe. But so to get into the personal stuff, I think there's too much of that. Let's just look at what's happening. And what's happening is that nobody really knows. These big changes have been made, and nobody really knows what's going to happen. And Elon Musk is one of the voices who said tariffs don't make sense, appears to be on his way out, even though he was supposed to be in a short term anyway. He's got to get back to his businesses. Teslas are being destroyed by the very people who were championing them, right?
Yeah,
both,
I mean,
both the stock and physically destroying the cars, you know, because you're driving a Tesla, which was the heroic car to have. You can have it keyed or firebombed or whatever. You know, the next thing is there's going to be some horrible situation where somebody driving one is shot or something like that, because the idea that you can use this kind of vigilante violence against inanimate objects, even if there are people in them, we shall see if that happen, is current, and it's very stupid.
Well, of course, it's absolutely ridiculous. You know, you buy a Tesla because is it or is it not a good vehicle, or does it not meet your needs? Not because
they're made in America.
Not because of who happens.
They're electric cars made in America. This is supposed to be nirvana, right?
Yeah, who happens to have a large shareholding in it? I mean, you know, the whole people are just becoming increasingly irrational.
But everybody who buys stock in Tesla has a shareholding.
Yeah.
So, right?
And their pension fund may have or their mutual fund may have a shareholding in it as well. So by just destroying inanimate objects to make a point, it doesn't bother Elon Musk. You're not making a point against Elon Musk.
He's making most of his money off the SpaceX and other things anyway. I mean, he's got the most amazing diversified portfolio, like all of the richest people in the world do.
Well, exactly. So people are just getting completely ridiculous about some of this. They're not focusing on it rationally.
Okay, can we stop on the tariffs?
Yeah, let's stop on the tariffs, because it could all have changed by tomorrow.
I think it's interesting. You know, they had a phrase, the world turned upside down, which was applied by writers in the colonial period to when the United States staged its revolution against the British Empire. The world turned upside down, and I rather feel like we've entered a sort of twilight zone in which that's true now. In fact, that'd be a good title for our talk today. Now, and a book looking at what's going on, or at least a monograph. Anyway, so no, but what's going on with Iran? I understand that we've moved a number of our B-2 stealth bombers over to the region. I mean, there's, I don't know, a dozen or so grouped together, which is a large grouping for these very destructive.
In Diego Garcia. Yeah, of course, which is the island which the United Kingdom is determined to give to the Maldives and give them a large amount of money.
Chagos Islands.
The Chagos Islands, which the Maldives were never owners of the Chagos Islands anyway. Anyway, but that's another.
We already did that.
We already did that. How left-wing lawyers like to destroy the world. Yes, they have moved them there because, of course, the point is from Diego Garcia, Iran is in range of the B-2 bomber. They've also, as you know, moved some sophisticated air defense, anti-missile defense systems to Israel. All of this is, of course, compatible with the idea that if Trump does not get what he wants out of these talks, which are just beginning with Iran, then he will take other action. I mean, there are a couple of points to make on that, if I may. The most important one, a major one, is that in fact, the number of points, since Trump sabotaged 7 years ago the last deal with Iran, Iran has improved its nuclear capability, and it can now enrich uranium up to 60%, which is not far short of, and they think they have the ability now very shortly to be able to enrich their uranium to the level which you need for a bomb. That's the first point. The second point is, of course, the Iranians are not stupid, and it's reckoned now that a lot of their capability is underground, so it is actually not as susceptible to a bombing campaign as it might have been a few years ago. And I was reading today, there seem to be slightly conflicting reports coming out of Iraq. On the one hand, it was suggested that the Iranians had told their Iraqi-based Iranian Guard sort of proxies to hand over their weapons to the Iraqi authorities, and the Iraqi authorities seemed quite clear that they're making progress in this regard. But on the other hand, there have been observed movements of some pretty advanced Iranian missile systems from Iran into Iraq. So it seems nobody's quite clear what the Iranian Guard proxies in Iraq, these kind of Shia militias, are actually necessarily up to. So it's a very fluid situation. But I suppose the good point is that at least the United States, in the person of this reprocessed real estate expert, Mr. Witkoff, is going to meet the Iranian foreign minister in, I forget where, Amman, I think, at the weekend, to begin talks about whether they can then have talks about doing something about Iran's nuclear weapons capability. There was a hope at one point they would be able to persuade Iran to give up all nuclear capabilities, but it seems that that's not likely to happen. The question is whether they can do some deal on the weapons. Iran Iran's capability in the wider region has been affected adversely by one, Israeli action against Hamas in Gaza, obviously, and against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and of course by the deposing of Assad in Syria. So Iran is, in one sense, in a fairly weak position. The other point to make about Iran is, not surprisingly, the regime in Iran is becoming ever less popular amongst its own population, largely because of the effects of sanctions, the general economic malaise, younger people feeling that this is all getting a bit silly in terms of the actions of the religious authorities. There was that famous case a couple of years ago, that poor young woman who was arrested by the police for not wearing a veil and was never seen alive again. So Iran is not in a desperately strong position in some ways. But at the end of the day, you don't need very many extremists with a large number of weapons to cause havoc. So yes, Iran is the next. And maybe Trump, in his wisdom, is clearing the decks with Ukraine and other places, or seeking to clear the decks, because he regards Iran as a more important immediate problem
Well, if you
than
know,
Russia,
Iran is a
and
bad
of course,
actor.
yeah.
Iran is a bad actor for as long as they've had the Islamic Revolution. Um, no doubt about that. So that's been going on since '78, when the Shah was expelled. So, or ran, or both, and you have this series of mullahs, imams, and supreme leaders, religious leaders in Iran, who actually subjugate the populace, and they use this sort of voodoo of religious cult, which really has very little to do with actual Islam. It's just it's a very extreme sort of secularized view of Islam, from what I can understand. And they use this to subjugate the people, which is actually, as you mentioned earlier, one of the most sophisticated and long-lived civilizations in the world.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is the point.
I mean, it's a brilliant society.
The
Persians are
Persian,
very interesting people.
the mistake a lot of people make is to confuse the Persians are not Arabs. They're completely different. And Persian civilization goes back a long way.
Yeah.
And so you are dealing with a sophisticated a people, probably an educated people. Yeah, I've not visited Iran as a tourist. It's pretty hard to do that these days. But apparently, people who have, so you go and see some of these old buildings, and you see the architecture, you see the art in these buildings in terms of the mosaics on the walls and so on. And it's very sophisticated. Interestingly, apparently, a lot of it shows people drinking wine or vineyards and things of that nature. So that's actually
Persia had nothing to do with this. Was existing many thousands of years, even if not under that name, before it's right next to the Garden of Eden.
It's a major part, a major part of the ancient world, of course. And where would Greek history be without Thermopylae? And where would the Battle of Thermopylae and the 300 Spartans be without the Persian invader? So we're dealing with a very with an ancient civilization of some importance in the world. And I think part of the problem is that you have to, whether you like it or not, when you're dealing with some countries, it's what I've never written it down, but I ought to write it down. What I would call my big country theory. Now, my big country theory is that some countries are just big, either because they're physically big, like Russia, like the United States, or they're big because of their economic importance, or they're big because of their history,
their cultural
and their cultural influence on the world. And I would say that on that test, Iran is a big country, and when you're dealing with a big country, you have to approach it with a different, a different point of view, a different mindset. Sorry, is the word I was grappling for.
I would say
you can't approach it and say, oh well, they're just ignorant Arabs who don't like us. A, because they're not ignorant, and B, they're not Arabs. Now they may or may not like us, but they may have good reason for not liking us, or they may have bad reason for not liking us. So again, but I think you do have to approach, and by I say you, I mean the West has to approach these countries in that spirit of understanding what you're actually dealing with. Because if you don't know what you're dealing with, how do you know how to deal with it? That's my.
No, I think it's. I agree with you. And what I wanted to say was, just briefly, was that this patina of Mohammedanism, how do you say it? Islam. Is a relatively new thing for these very ancient societies, including Egypt. I mean, they've just been sort of varnished with this.
I think the modern
idea.
Yes.
And these
Well, I
These
think
were
they've
very
all, you know,
great
they've all,
created
yeah.
civilizations. Sorry, go ahead.
You know, they've been Islamic. They've been countries where, you know, large amount of the population were followed Islam for a long time. But this modern extreme Islam is something relatively new, and that's the difference.
Yeah,
And
and I
that's
think we need to remember that that
and it's actually really, really new in the extent of having any influence, because if you take Mubarak of Egypt, if you take Saddam Hussein, if you take Assad father, not the son who just, and if you take Gaddafi, you know, they were probably not nice people, and it was, you know, pretty bad news if you were a citizen subject to their secret police.
I think
But
probably
they
not
had
nice
they,
people. There's
but they
little
had
doubt.
but
Wait, wait.
they had two
There's
point.
little doubt that they were. Wait. There's little doubt. I can't let you say that. There's little doubt that they were extremely evil people
Yeah,
uh,
yes, yeah.
through their actions. Okay.
But my point
Go
was
ahead.
going to be that all of them had two things in common. One, they kept the Muslim Brotherhood in check.
Yeah.
Two, they really weren't that religiously devout themselves, so they were actually quite tolerant of other religions within the countries. What we have created by removing these four people, or contributing to their removal, is a crescent of extreme Islam to the expense of ancient Christian and Jewish communities which lived peacefully in these places for generations of generations. And we have created that, and that is this modern, because they are reacting to a perceived slight from the West. Now, a lot of it is special pleading because these have been captured, like you get everywhere. You know, these political extremists have put on a black hat, claimed that they're descendants of Muhammad, and created chaos in those countries. But nevertheless, the fact is that before we removed these people, we should have thought a bit more carefully about what we were dealing with and what the likely result was. And that is the problem. You know, and in most cases, I know this is not a popular view, but in most cases, they weren't actually successfully exporting terrorism. They are now. And now they're doing it a different way. They're doing it in a different way by radicalizing the children of immigrants who came to the West quite happily and got stuck in and ran businesses, etc., etc. But these extremists are now radicalizing those people's children, and we have them in ever greater number in our populations. And this is a new threat which nobody wants to talk about. And because
It's a
that's
funny thing.
because that's racist. That's racist to want to protect your country all of a sudden.
Well, it's an odd thing how this Islam tends to take over and grow rather quickly in countries that have a long history, even the United States, of there being very little of Islam or Mohammedanism. How do you say this? Mohammedanism?
Well, I'd say Mohammedism.
Mohammedism. Yeah.
I suppose.
Or the Mohammedans. Yeah. No one uses that phrase anymore, but it was once used all the time. I think it's not a bad one since Muhammad is the guy, the prophet. That they come into countries and tend to just take over this sort of virulent
Well, they take over, but they
rather violent way.
Yeah, but they take over because we let them.
Yes, well,
we
there's
allow
little
it
doubt about that.
because we have governments with their left-wing misplaced guilt complexes who think this is okay, that, oh, isn't it wonderful? And if you protest against it, you're somehow racist. Well, I don't think
there's nothing wrong with the different. I mean, it's the different religions. It's just the militant nature of any extremist in a religion becomes untenable in a civilized society, and because the idea is to worship as you wish. But the old phrase, your freedom ends where the next fellow's begins, should be adhered to. And
well, yes,
there's no reason why
well, it is, and we've allowed
people can't coexist.
Yeah, well, there are millions upon millions of Muslims who are good, law-abiding citizens who are happy to be wherever they happen to be, and are good, loyal Americans, good, loyal Britons, or whatever. And I
You
think
just want to get on with life, Nicholas.
exactly, and I think many of them are probably very distressed by what they see, and they're probably
Yeah.
even more distressed by our governments kowtowing to this nonsense. They probably wish our own governments to be a bit stricter with the trouble causers. I mean,
That's what they're used to
it's a very weak analogy, but
in their own religion.
years ago, not years ago, but when I've talked to Poles who've been brought up in the United Kingdom, for example, they said to me, "Why did the United Kingdom?" This is Poles speaking, who have lived and been brought up in the United Kingdom. Why did the United Kingdom allow so many bad Poles, criminals, to come into the country? I mean, that's their attitude about a percentage of the population which came when Poles were free to move freely. And by a rather tenuous analogy, I'm sure many Muslims or other religion immigrants think exactly the same in the UK. Here I am. We came to this country. We're happy to be here. We're working hard. These newcomers come and they cause trouble, and we're all tarred with the same brush. That must be immensely frustrating, as it is in any organization when a small number of people give the rest a bad name.
No kidding. That's true. I know that from experience. Okay. We're going to wind this up with a couple of lighter questions for you.
Okay.
And airports, love them or hate them, we have to use them, right?
We have
and
to
air
use
travel has not got easier. It's got harder and more expensive since COVID. There's a recent survey. I'm going to ask you two questions. Where do you have to answer? Answer them in order, and let's guess, and we'll talk briefly about it. The first one is, what do you reckon is the best airport for eating, for food and drink in the world? What do you reckon? You might be surprised. You might.
I would say probably these days, it'll be somewhere really unexpected, like Dubai or somewhere.
Bingo. This is why we talk.
I should say
I wouldn't have got that right.
I've never been to Dubai.
Yeah.
But people say that generally
I've been there many times, but been through there many times. But it's you're absolutely right. But I wouldn't have got it.
I wouldn't. But it's only because you just see the way these Middle East, let's be more accurate. These Gulf airlines now are really, and the amount of money and they have to put into these airports and so on, they're really expanding.
Well, they have great shopping, and the Emirates is a really nice airline. It's really a pleasure to. It's one of the few places it's airline's a pleasure to ride on, to take a lift from. Now, lift, get it?
Lift, yes, very good.
I didn't realize I'd said that. Okay, and here for you is in the United States. Where do you reckon is the best eating and drinking in an airport?
Oh goodness, I've only been to about 3 United States airports. None of them struck me as being particularly. I've no idea. It'll be somewhere.
It's the busiest airport in the world.
Chicago?
Atlanta.
Is Atlanta busier than Chicago?
Well, it's a close run thing.
Yeah.
And Chicago's number 2 for the best eating. Atlanta's number 1, Chicago's number 2. I've been through Chicago many, many times, especially in the last decade. And I never noticed that the food was particularly good, but then I'm not big on eating in the airport or on the airplane. No. But usually I might grab a sandwich. But, I just don't like flying with a full stomach. It's rather annoying. But those two are the ones. But Atlanta's famous for its soul food, apparently, that people like, and it's fried chicken and things like that. Southern type food, I suppose.
Oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't. Well, I haven't flown. I haven't really. Well, I haven't flown to Dubai either, so I suppose but
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on American airports.
Which airports have you flown to in America?
Chicago, didn't
Okay.
notice.
You didn't notice the food. Well, it's a new thing. I don't know when you were there last.
Philadelphia and
Yeah.
and Boston.
But never New York. Yeah.
Never knew. No, people seem to say that JFK is probably the world's worst airport for a major airport.
But pretty good food, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it's not a great airport, but it's close to the city.
well, it's close to the city, but
That's an advantage.
yeah,
So is Newark, though. You're
what
just
always struck me about flying to America, with the exception of Philadelphia, because it was obviously quiet in the afternoon, but certainly in Chicago, were the queues to get through passport control. And what surprised was Americans seem to have to queue as long as anybody else, even in the American only queue.
often you have to queue for a while because I always think there's a slight suspicion if you've been traveling out of the United States. What the heck are you up to?
Yeah.
Why would anybody want to leave here? It's kind of American thing. Well, I can see in some ways there's some very beautiful spots.
But I mean, I always find, I found the people I dealt with very polite. But I'm polite to them. Because a friend of mine, Charles, said, he said, when he said, be careful when you reach American immigration. Don't be your usual sense of humor, because these young guys, they won't get it. They'll think there's something wrong with you and they'll arrest you or something. But
don't make jokes at the check-in, the immigration check-in, because they might think you're what would you take in the Mickey?
Taking the Mickey. Well, I did at one, because I'd been through and my thing didn't come up on the screen, and so he had to check everything manually. I said, there you are. The federal government has spent billions of dollars and it doesn't work. The guy did smile. He said, well, I know, but I can tell you, you are the second Nicholas Richardson to have passed through this airport today. So I was lucky. He had
maybe Richardsons are a dime a dozen, as we know.
Yeah, then when you go through immigration, then that was passport control. Then immigration. I think it was immigration. It must have been immigration in Chicago. The guy said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm here for a legal conference. He said, are you a lawyer? I said, yes. He said, gosh, have you seen what lawyers are doing to our economy?
Really?
Yeah, good guy.
That's so funny. Yeah, I like it when people make a bit of a joke. But I find when I'm coming from Europe and I'm going to Chicago, particularly if I'm coming from Poland or somewhere in Central Europe, they're extremely, oh yeah, cool. Oh yeah, you live over there. That's cool. Because they expect it in Chicago and New York, right?
Yeah, they probably do. They
They think, oh, you're a Polish family or something like that. Yeah. So anyway, let's wrap it up for today.
Okay, that was very enjoyable as always.
Any special message for the folks?
The folks?
Yeah, with your books behind you must have something learned to say. There's a lot.
Learned to say. Well, I'm not sure. I'd be much more learned if I had time to read more of them.
I've got a great subject for us next talk, and it's going to be a little more philosophical. I'm not going to tell you what it is.
All right. So I can't prepare.
I think that it's philosophical and combines great spiritual thought, and I think you're going to enjoy that. I want to add some of these kind of subjects.
Of course, we should, because folk can learn about tariffs. They can probably sick to the back teeth of tariffs by now. I don't know what words of wisdom can I give you. I mean, I suppose the only real words of wisdom are, it's never going to be as good as they promise, nor as bad as you fear.
I like that one, and I would add mine. Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Or as Churchill, as a great
Churchill said, keep going. There it is. You can see it now.
Well, Churchill said, keep buggering on. I mean, that's it.
Something like that.
Or if you like, or if you're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah, that's where this comes from.
Yeah.
This is the end of that. It says Winston Churchill, if you can read it at the bottom.
Well, we can read that, Winston Churchill.
I saw this cup. I had to buy it, and this is the one I use all the time. Okay.
Great.
Thanks, my friend.
My pleasure.
Talk to you soon.
Look forward to that.
The best. And that's it from Will Richardson here and Nicholas Richardson there. Thanks for watching. Talk to you soon. Auf Wiedersehen, as they say in The Sound of Music.